Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Andrea Weckerly, and welcome to the Ready Living Podcast, where each episode is designed to educate, inspire, and empower you to create the life you want. Thanks for joining us, and remember to subscribe for free on your favorite platform. My guest today is Stephen Keyes. After decades leading in global corporate life, he made a deliberate shift from success to significance. He's now co-founder of the Wisdom Vault, where he interviews founders, funders, and change makers about building a life of purpose. Stephen is also a philanthropist, serving as chair and board trustee of the IFS Foundation, host of the Giving Habit podcast, a father of two, an ultra runner who's covered hundreds of miles for causes he believes in, and his focus now is on helping others embrace significance in midlife. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me onto the show.
The thread running through your work is that the second half of life isn't primarily about acquiring more. It's about becoming more useful, more connected, and more aligned with what really matters. There is a realization that took you some time to come to, though. So let's talk a little bit about your journey. Although you enjoyed a successful career, corporate success didn't bring the deeper sense of meaning or purpose you were looking for. And there came a point in life where achievement alone couldn't answer the deeper questions like, how do I contribute? What brings me joy? Where do I direct my energy? What kind of impact do I actually want to have? What changed for you both personally and professionally that brought you face to face with those questions? And did you know at the time that something was missing, or did that realization only become clearer later?
I think certainly, yes, you can think of success in the context of corporate careers. When I think about the corporate definition of that term, success is associated with what you achieve. If we think about significance, to my mind, it's really how others benefit because we were here. There's a kind of shift from being self-oriented to being oriented towards others. So if we think about the idea of a corporate career, success is largely measured externally. We think of promotions, additional responsibility, we think of financial security, we think about leading larger teams, larger organizations. And yes, those things matter, of course. And I have to say, I've been very fortunate in that respect. I'm grateful I'm in a position now where I can provide for myself, my kids, my mum and dad. I've had some wonderful experiences along the way. But are those things how I would define success today? Maybe not. Today, I'm more interested in this idea of significance. And the difference being success is what you achieve, significance is who benefits because you are here. I think the idea emerged over time for me. There were a number of things that happened in my personal life. There was a divorce and volunteering as a coping mechanism. I started participating more in things that felt like they mattered to me. And over time, a clearer sense of purpose emerged. But it came from a position of curiosity and intentionality. And that's led on to many of the wonderful opportunities you mentioned. The IFS Foundation, volunteering with some local organizations here, the running, the new business that we started up last year. I'd summarize all that to say achievement builds a career, that's great, but significance builds more of a meaningful legacy.
I absolutely love that. For a lot of people, midlife is a time of serious introspection. You've described midlife as a moment when the maps run out, when previous definitions of success no longer provide direction or motivate us the way they have in the past. Have you found that most people regard this as an opportunity to rediscover themselves, or are there some who experience this period as an identity crisis?
It's a really interesting question. And I think if we continue to use the tools that got us to where we are today to try to determine the next phase of life, then I think we're going to struggle. And I think it's going to come across like an identity crisis. There is a moment that seems to hit us when we do start to ask those questions about what's the purpose beyond the paycheck? Is there something more meaningful to life than corporate career and achievement? You could easily go, oh, okay, well, the answer to that is I've got to find a new job. I've got to go do something different, but use the same tools. I would argue that that's where the sense of an identity crisis kicks in. That's where there's a sense of really struggling with midlife. I think that's an opportunity to actually step back and start to reflect a little bit. So for me, it was a reflection on what are the things that I really care about. What are the things that really matter to me? Am I evidencing those things on a day-to-day basis? These tools that have carried me this far in my corporate career, they don't feel as relevant or as useful to me anymore. I need a different set of tools. But rather than going, oh, well, I can't do anything different until I've built that new toolkit for myself, for me, it was a question of, okay, I need to be curious. I'm feeling things that are pulling at me. Let's explore that more. Curiosity leads to a conversation, and conversation leads to new opportunities and a whole bunch of incredible things that have happened over the last few years.
You've also said that midlife involves recognizing that some of our ambitions actually belong to our parents or the community or culture we've grown up in rather than ourselves. How do people distinguish between their authentic ambitions and such imposed ambitions?
Wow, that's a super cool question. I started up a new media and education business with my good friend in Australia. It's called The Wisdom Vault, and it's focused on men navigating midlife. We have a flagship podcast called Don't Let the Old Man In. We explore a lot of these themes. And what seems to emerge is this sense of people being willing to hold space to ask better questions of themselves. And it inevitably gravitates around getting clearer through intention and through practice about your core values. For me, it's been very much about community, learning, being of service to others. I recognize these are my core values now. So I start to intentionally apply those values when I'm thinking about decisions that I want to make. Where do I choose to invest my time? Who are the people that I choose to invest in? What are the things that give me energy and bring me joy? It becomes super obvious what your core values are and how you can put them to good use in service to your own life.
Well, speaking of values, in one of your Substack articles, you had written that if we strip away titles, income, and accomplishments, what remains? So, my question to you is what happens when somebody discovers that their achievements are not connected to their core values? Is that a difficult question for some people to answer honestly?
Yeah, I think it is, because I think some people discover things about themselves that maybe they're uncomfortable with, and that can be quite daunting. For me, it was a really difficult process. That journey of exploration caused me to question a number of aspects of my life. I found myself in an unhappy marriage, and there was a subsequent divorce. Kids kind of going to the separate houses for periods of time. And I just remember those first moments where I didn't have my kids with me, and they were 20 miles up the road with their mum, and that incredible loneliness. Divorce is expensive, and I was broke and feeling incredibly lonely. I didn't have the money to go out and get drunk and drown my sorrows. And so you're kind of left with yourself. I felt useless in every respect. I needed to feel useful. And I think that may be a strong male attribute. I found a local charity, like a food bank type thing. They made meals. And suddenly I had something to do. And there were people that were knowing me for who I am as opposed to who I was supposed to be in a work context. And that led me to feel like I want to do more. So I went online and looked up where are some other local volunteering opportunities. And then I started figuring out maybe this is a good way to reconnect with my kids. So I invited them along to do some volunteering with me. And suddenly we're having different conversations. So I would say that my journey, that transition was an entirely selfish act. I was just lonely. I was uncomfortable with myself. So volunteering was a way of being useful. But what it opened up was a whole bunch of other opportunities. And I just followed that.
How do we know when money is serving our lives versus when our lives are serving money? What happens if someone discovers that their spending habits aren't connected with what they value?
When I think about our podcast, we organize our content roughly across 8 broad themes, or what we call pillars of positive aging. And one of them might be community or relationships or philanthropy, mental, physical well-being, financial planning. The recurring thing that we see come up is this how much is enough question. In a lot of people's mindsets, there's never enough. You have to keep on going. I think there's some research out there. The amount of money can continue to grow, but the happiness index kind of plateaus. I think often we assume the standards of others. That's the standard. Oh, we have to aspire to that. I think fundamentally comparison is the thief of joy. We've got to move beyond that and go, hey, what is our standard? What is my goal? What are the things that I'm aiming for? I had to figure out what do I need in order to provide for myself so that I'm independent and capable, so I'm not a burden to my children, so that I can provide for my children in terms of their education and their upbringing as best as I can as a father. For my parents, so that they never have to worry about anything. I want to be able to provide for them, healthcare and so on. That matters. At the same time, I was beginning to think about these core values, the type of work that I do, the type of people that I work with, the way that I show up at work. Someone asked me a really great question many years ago. What parts of me haven't met before? He'd noticed and observed in my life that I was quite creative, but in my work life, I was very disciplined. And he was basically inviting this idea of, well, what if I brought more discipline to my creative life? And what if I brought some of that creativity into my work life? What if I lived a more integrated life? Financial goals mattered to me, but how I went about pursuing them, I took a different approach. It became less about me and what I needed to achieve. And okay, in terms of the teams that I led, what about us? There was always a sense of community around it, a sense of being of service to others. Being myself in the workplace a little bit more authentically led to arguably more success, as it turns out, certainly a more rewarding career on many levels, and ultimately has enabled me to now transition into doing a whole bunch of other things I really enjoy and really look forward to every day. So yeah, I think it starts with that question of how much is enough.
One of the other things that I noticed was that earlier in your career, you thought more in terms of the sovereign individual, but later came to understand the power of the collective. And you now say that every decision you make is informed by the idea of community.
I do believe that we can achieve so much more when we cooperate and collaborate. I do notice men tend to pursue quite individualistic careers. It's about me. It's about I. I had the successful career. I achieved these things. The women that are in my life that I work with, they've nurtured relationships that have seen them through their entire career. And many women I know have relationships that extend right back to school or from early stages of the career right through their lives. I wasn't really investing in those relationships. I was outsourcing some of those relationships, like my relationship with mum and dad to my ex-wife. It was almost like I'm too busy focused on my career. My partner can manage those things. So it's terrible. Today, I get much more joy and satisfaction when things are accomplished as a group of people. I think about community in the very smallest sense, a group of people, a team of people coming together with a common purpose in mind and achieving something really awesome. I get far greater satisfaction out of that now and seeing how people grow and learn and respond and contribute. That's far more meaningful and rewarding than anything that my own personal career has ever achieved. The podcast that I host is called The Giving Habit. It's about uncovering the grit and hope and creativity of social impacts. Interviewing people through that and the people that I've met through my work in philanthropy, I've realized that we need to collectively move on from quite outdated notions of what philanthropy is. This idea that there are things that are wrong and that we have to come in as saviors and fix those things. And whether that's through the IFS Foundation or through my volunteering work with the Majority Trust, I'm really interested in this idea of community-led change, development, improvement, where people can serve as useful outsiders. People might have resources, ideas, networks, capital in some way, shape or form that can be of service to those communities. But ultimately, those communities are in the best position to decide for themselves what that change looks like. I do not wish to diminish the sense of the world's problems. There are serious, serious problems out there. But when I look out the window, when I meet communities in different parts of the world, I think the world is fundamentally made up of decent people looking for belonging and purpose, looking to contribute to something greater than themselves. I see that whether I'm in Sri Lanka or Singapore, Australia or London, wherever I am, I see it. And I think through participating and contributing, we start to understand that a little bit more deeply. That means I tend towards optimism these days.
You've argued that community isn't about saving the world in capital letters, but about showing up locally, knowing names, taking small responsibilities seriously, and contributing without expecting applause. Why do you think these acts are often undervalued?
I think because we, maybe like my former self, we tend to outsource these ideas sometimes. Someone else will do that. I'm too busy focused on my career and me and the things that I need to do. I think there's a tendency to conceive of those things as somebody else's problem. We're all part of this planet, this global community, and of our local community. It's important for each of us to find our way to participate and contribute to that.
One of the best ways to do that is to build community, being physically with other individuals. You've commented on the disappearance of spaces where people can simply gather, where they can allow people to belong without needing to buy something or justify their presence.
There's an excellent book by Michael Sandel called What Money Cannot Buy. I think he's arguing that free market economics is okay, but not when it turns us from a market economy to a market society. When we over-commercialize everything, every facet of our life is being commercialized, I think we're in danger of losing something. We should value free spaces where we can meet, get exposed to new ideas, meet people, meet our friends and neighbors, and discover wonderful things that are happening within our local communities. And actually, through that, discover the strengths of our communities and start thinking about how we can build upon those strengths, as opposed to the traditional narrative, which thinks about deficits. This is what's wrong. I prefer to think not about what's wrong within a community, but what's strong within a community and how we can build on that as a much more progressive and optimistic way of thinking about community and thinking about progress and growth.
An important theme in your work is that many men reach midlife having learned how to achieve, provide, and endure, but not necessarily how to connect, grieve, or be vulnerable. Where do you think that narrow definition of masculinity comes from?
It's one that we learn in certain corporate context. It's almost encouraged. These ideas about what a man should be, the hunter and a provider. When we leave other things out of the equation, it narrows the language we can use to identify ourselves. It narrows the way we think about ourselves, the space we can inhabit. This idea of my career. If it's my career I'm interested in, it could also be at the expense of someone else. And so there is this kind of zero-sum game mentality, right? I don't think it's very healthy. And I think we can see the consequences that has in terms of relationships, in terms of domestic violence, in terms of male suicide rates, increase in social isolation and so on. And I think that it's really something we need to address. I'm pleased to see that it's being spoken about more and explored further. There's a lot of investment going in UK government, for example, certainly a lot of investment that's happening in Singapore, where I live as well. I think about the work that I do for the IFS Foundation. I think about some of the people that I interviewed as part of the Giving Habit podcast. A lot of them are doing programs around what I might call preventative work. I see people putting basic building blocks in place to help us live healthier, more fulfilling lives.
You've suggested that in midlife, men should embrace trusting the man you already are. What exactly does that mean?
There's a broader idea at play here, which is that somehow we have to wait until everything is perfect in our lives before we can act. We have to have the money, financial stability things all sorted out, acquired all this self-awareness, and only when all these things are absolutely in place, then we can act. I think it holds a lot of us back because we're scared of stepping out of the comfort zone. We might even be a little bit scared of what if we're not as successful as we think we might be if I inhabit this persona that I really desire to become. So it's easier to sit on the other side of the line and know I coulda, shoulda, woulda than actually stepping across that line and really fully embracing that. What I'm trying to say is actually we've got to start somewhere. The first simple step is not overthinking it. It's not necessarily thinking about, let's analyze our purpose and all of our core values and spend ages and ages overthinking or overcomplicating it. If I think about how I developed my core values, it wasn't just sitting there thinking it through and working through some framework. It was experiencing things. I realize now there's a common thread here. Community is something that really matters to me. Oh, that's interesting. Or, you know what? I am happiest when I'm learning. Oh, okay. All right. I can now look back and see how they were manifesting themselves through different aspects of my life. But all of these things I've learned through practice and through a degree of intentionality, whether that's learning how to run long distances or how to host a podcast or how to be chair of a foundation. Yes, it was uncomfortable at times, but that space when you're outside of your comfort zone, that's when the learning takes place. It's just a question of discovery through practice.
You're a father, and you've talked about the emotional challenge when children leave home, the feeling of having lost the daily role that defined you. Is that a type of grief?
Absolutely. It's a grief for an identity that once shaped us, that defined a huge aspect of our lives. There is a letting go process, and it is a form of grieving. And it's probably made harder by the fact that kids, they're also testing out their wings. And that can be quite difficult for a parent. But ultimately, we have to learn to let our children go and hope one day that they come back to us. And in my experience, they do. There's that letting go to allow a new relationship to emerge.
You've noted that children still need their parents after leaving home. How does parenting evolve from manager and guide to mentor?
I try to ask better questions. One of the volunteering programs that I found myself involved in was with a wonderful charity in Sydney called Street Work. They support youth at risk, and they do a range of different programs. When a child in Sydney, New South Wales, is arrested, then they get taken to a juvenile police station where they need to be charged. And they need to have a responsible adult there when they're being processed by the police officer. And for whatever reason, sometimes the parent is not available or doesn't want to be available. There's not someone within that family unit. And, it might be happening at an unusual time of night. So the regular service from Street Work isn't there. So there were volunteers like me, advocates, who receive phone calls at strange times of night. Child's just been arrested and this is what they've been arrested for. You rock up to the police station. The role of the advocate is not to tell the child what to do. The advocate is there to advocate for that child, to make sure that the process is run according to the letter of the law, that the police officers behave themselves, and that the child has some understanding of what is happening, that the child is given access to juvenile legal aid, the child understands what the potential options are that might be available to them. In some instances, there's no option. They just need to understand what's going to happen because of the seriousness of the crime. My job is not to tell them what to do. As an advocate, our job is to make sure that they have the right information to make the best possible decision. And once they've made that decision, to empower them to the best of your ability. I think I learned a lot about parenthood through that process, allowing my children to be adults and to treat them as adults and to not serve up the answers. As a parent, I try to be more, well, what do you think? And have you thought about this? And what do you think the consequences of that might be? And when that individual's made a decision, you empower that and you champion them like a lion and you show them every kindness and support you possibly can.
Absolutely love that. In your Substack, you've also written about the Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi and its relevance to midlife. One of the lines in your article that I thought was brilliant: nobody wants advice from someone untouched by life. The most compelling faces are the faces with evidence on them.
We are shaped by our experiences. I look back and there were some super challenging times. They shape us. They shape our identity and they shape our understanding and how we move through the world. I ran this coast-to-coast challenge across the UK and we did it as a fundraiser. There's two of us, lovely lady Rachel, tough as nails. So we ran from the west coast to the east coast of England. It's about 300 kilometers, so 192 miles. And we decided to do that in 6 days. And there's a lot of elevation. It's quite steep in sections. On day 4, she develops shin splints in her left leg. It was quite painful for her. I've had that experience. I know what that is like. And I also know that it is not my place to tell her what to do in that situation. I know it from my own experience of running and having developed problems out on the trail. I have to make the decision whether to continue or give up. And so we went through exactly that same experience. Okay, what information do you need? Who do you need to talk to make that decision? She took some advice from the medic that we had as part of our support crew. She decided to continue. And so then my job was to make sure that we got her across the finishing line as safely as we could. I made that commitment to her and to the rest of the team that that's what we would do. And she made it across the finishing line. She's now resting up. The shin splints are receding happily. And she's already talking about what's our next adventure going to be next year.
You've said suffering for myself is negotiable. Suffering for something that matters isn't. How does that tie into having a sense of purpose?
Resilience is about meaning. People can do incredible things, endure extraordinary hardship if they know why they're doing it. That particular instance, my running buddy having shin splints, I was in pain. I had niggles, I had aches. It wasn't very comfortable at the time. But what was interesting to me was this sense that she needed help and I needed someone to help. As soon as I was in service to someone else, my own aches and niggles, they were just totally contextualized. They became inconsequential. I made a commitment to her and the team that we'd finish together, and that became the meaning. 30 plus miles a day for 6 days straight. And I didn't feel any of those last 2 days. And it's not some superhuman thing at all. It was just my needs vanished in the face of someone else's need. So that's on a kind of smaller scale. Writ large, I think, we can endure extraordinary hardship if we know why we're doing it. It's a constant source of energy, of meaning, of renewed purpose. It carries us forward.
For someone listening in their 40s or 50s or 60s or older and quietly wondering if their best days are behind them, what would you tell them?
I think that's a deficit-oriented mindset. I prefer to think about what's strong, a more positive mindset that actually midlife brings some wonderful things. I think midlife is an opportunity for renewal. It's an opportunity to invest in the relationships that matter. We can tap into unexpected levels of physical capability and activity. There is learning to be had. Often the question is, how do we get started? And I would certainly try to suggest there's no need to make a dramatic life decision. We can choose powerlessness or we can choose to feel powerful in that moment. What capital is available to me? What ideas, what relationships, what networks, what things interest me? First, I'd schedule a coffee with someone whose life genuinely interests you. Just go have coffee with them or go have a cup of tea. Ask them questions. How do they start doing the things that they're doing? What do they get out of it? Why do they do this? And maybe see if that person can connect you with one other person to continue that conversation. Second, I would advocate that you volunteer somewhere for a few hours, because when we are of service to others, we kind of step outside of ourselves for a moment. We can think a little bit more clearly about our own lives. We begin to put our own hardships and our own challenges into context. Volunteering has a really, really interesting way of giving us much broader, wider context to understand our own lives. And I think that's incredibly valuable when we're going through a period of reflection. Don't worry if you don't know the answer. Nobody is clear on that answer all the time. The vast majority of us live our life without being clear on that answer. And that's okay. If we keep following that curiosity, we'll eventually get there. Some clarity will emerge from that.
Where can people find you online to learn more about your work?
So thewisdomvault.org is a business that we have. I'd love people to have a look at that. There's links to my articles. You'll also find those on Substack and Medium. You'll find me on LinkedIn. Please reach out. I'd love to be able to kickstart a conversation if you like. We at the Wisdom Vault believe that midlife is an invitation to become more intentional. I see it as a new whole phase of life that's just waiting to open up. And we have an opportunity to invest in ourselves and our health, in our curiosity and our relationships, and find new ways to be useful. I think that lends itself towards the significance that makes life joyful and meaningful.
Stephen, thank you so much for having taken the time today.
I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for having me, Andrea.